In West Mesa, in 2009, a woman is walking her dog when suddenly the dog starts digging into the ground. The woman approaches and is shocked, quickly calling 911, prompting law enforcement authorities to begin an investigation. And there, a graveyard full of bones appears before their eyes. In total, they discover the remains of 11 women and one unborn child. The police chief, Carter, reveals that the remains have been sent to forensic pathologists to help identify the victims and determine how and when they died. Reporters begin asking Carter questions, but he asserts that they are not at liberty to discuss any further information. Afterward, Carter informs Young and her partner, Detective Ortega, that the mayor wants to involve the FBI in the case. He adds that the FBI is sending over one of their profilers, whom they need to pick up in 2 hours. The partners then pick up FBI agent Pete at the airport, and he requests to be taken straight to headquarters, as he wants to start working right away. When Carter asks if he has any leads on who the killer might be, Pete suggests that it could be anyone they meet every day. However, he quickly clarifies that even after examining the crime scene and the evidence, the best he can do is make an educated guess. Pete believes that the person they should be looking for is a mission-oriented killer, someone who thinks he's making the world a better place by eliminating people he perceives as causing him to sin. Pete then describes what the suspect might look like. A Hispanic male in his 30s, extremely religious, with at least one prior arrest involving women and living in close proximity to the boneyard. The next day, Young notices Ortega on the phone, telling someone that they have sent the DNA to be processed. He explains that it might take some time, but they will soon uncover the truth. Next, Young and Ortega interview a woman who claims that a man once threatened her with a gun to force her to sleep with him. She describes the man as a large Hispanic guy in his 30s named Caesar, with a tattoo on his arm. She tried to defend herself by grabbing the gun, but it turned out to be unloaded, so she had to run for her life. She also mentions another incident from around the same time when she had a run-in with a dirty cop named Tate. People speculate that the pregnant girl found on the mesa was impregnated by Tate, and he may have gotten rid of her to cover it up. Later, Ortega informs Carter that he wants more information about an officer named Tate from the narcotics department. Apparently, Tate was once suspended for misconduct and had faced several complaints about making faulty arrests. Back in the spring of 2003, Tate came face-to-face with his accuser, a woman named Maria. However, despite the accusations, union red tape prevented his termination, and instead, Tate was only suspended but later reinstated. Carter reveals that the girl Tate impregnated went missing after she told him he was the father. Suspiciously, the girl found in the mesa matches that description. Carter then instructs Ortega to keep this information to himself. Meanwhile, Pete is examining evidence and reviewing all the files of the missing women when he recalls a memory from 2004. At the time, Pete was helping his daughter, Sam, change her car tire when, suddenly, one of his enemies appeared out of nowhere and opened fire on them. Pete quickly took the attacker down, but Sam tragically died that day. This loss is the driving force behind Pete's determination to catch this killer. The next day, Ortega follows a group of women on the street and meets a woman named Candy. He shows Candy a picture of the missing girls, hoping she might have some information. Initially, Candy is dismissive and uninterested. However, when Ortega mentions that one of the girls, Selena, is his niece, Candy softens and reveals that the girls in the photos were her friends. Candy admits they were aware of the risks of their work, but believes her friends just ran out of luck. Candy refuses to provide further details, but Ortega urges her to come to the station, look at some pictures, and make a statement. He gives her his card in case she changes her mind. Just then, a car pulls up and a man is seen kicking a girl out onto the street. Ortega immediately orders the man to stop, but the driver flees. The man named Caesar arrives at his house, screaming and crying, begging to be kept away from the cop, behaving like a psychopath, as Pete describes. He enters a room, collapses onto the bed, and remembers what happened, where Caesar is seen walking into a convenience store and buying a drink. The store owner appears to recognize him as Caesar. Just then, the girl enters the store and Caesar stares at her before awkwardly asking if she needs someone to walk her home. His behavior scares both the girl and the store owner, prompting Caesar to leave. But Caesar waits until the girl leaves the store and stares at her with evil intentions. Back at headquarters, Ortega receives a call from Candy, who says she's ready to talk. When Young asks about the call, Ortega lies, claiming it's from a friend. Later, Ortega meets Candy, who is now prepared to make a statement. Candy reveals that she, along with Selena and another friend, China, are outside their usual place, when Selena received a text from Tate. Shortly afterward, a car arrived and she left. That was the last time they saw her, but they didn't report it to cops, because one of their own was involved and they feared for their lives. The next day, Ortega identifies 4 missing girls and one who matches the profile of the missing pregnant girl. Surprisingly, the arresting officer for all 4 cases is Tate. Ortega presents his findings to Pete and Carter, who are impressed by his investigation. He reveals that 20 of the girls who went missing between 1999 and 2000 had arrest records, and 12 of them were arrested by Tate. Carter is stunned by the possibility that the serial killer might be a cop. With 12 of the missing persons linked to Tate's arrest records, they now have grounds to build a case against him. However, Carter insists on complete certainty before authorizing any action. But Pete is having second thoughts about the type of killer they're dealing with. He is convinced the killer isn't that easy to catch and is highly precise, ensuring he leaves no evidence behind. Pete also describes how the killer operates, narrating a scenario where a girl is alone at an amusement park, while the killer watches her silently and patiently, and later that night the girl's body is shown being buried in the boneyard. In the next scene, another girl is seen walking along the road when the killer offers her a ride. The girl believes he is just a kind person and agrees, not knowing the danger she is in. Pete adds that we encounter at least 36 serial killers in our lifetime, which means they are pretty much everywhere, and we should never let our guard down, not even for a single second. Meanwhile, Carter, busy with the investigation, tries to call home to talk to his kids. Unfortunately, it's too late. They are already asleep, and his wife reprimands him for it. Flashback shows young women being dragged onto a bus by traffickers, and Carter was one of the officers who rescued them. However, several police officers were killed that day. Pete, Carter, and Ortega each have their own personal reasons for working tirelessly to catch these kinds of people, because they are also victims who have suffered loss at the hands of these killers. The next morning, Pete introduces Agent Womack to Carter. Pete had informed Womack about Tate being the prime suspect, and Womack reveals that the FBI has been investigating Tate for a long time and assures him Tate is not the killer. Carter is annoyed at the FBI for conducting their investigation behind his back, but Womack explains that many of the women Tate had arrested were working at the mansion of a big syndicate. The FBI had hoped those women would lead them to the syndicate, but instead they were killed, and the FBI don't believe Tate is the one responsible, but rather someone much bigger. Womack assures Carter that the FBI is willing to provide resources and Pete's assistance to help find the real killer. Ortega, however, is not convinced by the FBI's explanation. He believes that Tate is the killer and vows to prove it. Meanwhile, Ortega is at the narcotics department, meeting with Detective Graham in the hope of getting permission to question Tate, claiming he is a possible boneyard suspect, and Graham immediately summons Tate into his office. When Tate arrives, Ortega points out his involvement with the women before they died and also questions why Tate transferred from vice to narcotics. Tate defends himself, claiming he transferred to avoid trouble. Ortega, however, assures him that he will soon find the truth. After hearing this, Tate becomes annoyed and storms out. Later that night, Tate is at a bar, drinking heavily, and while Tate is in the men's room, Graham shows up and beats him up for becoming the prime suspect for the boneyard case. Graham is furious at the attention Tate is bringing to their department, as Graham fears that his involvement with a criminal organization might be exposed because of Tate, and orders him to clean up his mess. The next day, Ortega meets his sister Nina, but unbeknownst to him, Young has been following him, and has even taken pictures of him during their meeting. Ortega asks Nina for more information about Selena prior to her disappearance, and learns that Selena was staying with a friend named Felix before she went missing. Meanwhile, Pete, Womack, and the rest of the FBI continues with their investigation, and Pete assures Womack he will not stop until he finds their suspect. At the same time, the killer continues his spree, pulling up to a block and taking another woman. Moments later, he drives to a remote location and buries the woman's body as usual. Then the next night, the killer now finds Candy without her realizing, and Candy runs out of luck. The next day, Ortega meets Felix and asks about Selena, hoping to gather more information about her disappearance. Felix becomes disrespectful of Selena, and Ortega heats up with his unpleasant words, forcing Felix to admit that he kicked Selena out and just thinks that she might have been sold to traffickers by other groups, making Ortega realize he has nothing to do with her death. Later, Young meets Sergeant Graham to gather information about the case and Tate's involvement. She also mentions that Ortega is hiding something from them, so they team up to start their own investigation. The next morning, Graham meets Ortega to negotiate with him, but he soon realizes that Ortega will go to any lengths to uncover the truth, even if it means getting himself and his squad into trouble. Afterward, Graham meets with Young and hands her a file containing all the information about Ortega. Meanwhile, Pete is gathering information from the convenience store owner, who tells him about Caesar acting strangely with a young girl at his store, who happens to be as one of the Boneyard girls. At the same time, Young visits Nina's house to learn more about what Ortega is hiding. He discovers that Ortega is Selena's uncle, a fact he has concealed from her and their department. Meanwhile, Graham and his team raids a house full of illegal goods, but he offers the arrested men less jail time in exchange for providing false testimony that could implicate Tate. Later, the chief confronts Ortega about an informant who is pointing the finger at Tate. However, Ortega believes Graham is framing Tate to protect himself, but he decides to go along with it in order to get Tate behind bars. But despite Ortega's efforts, his evidence against Tate is weak, and the DNA test on Tate and the unborn baby is negative. Ortega's theory begins to fall apart, and it isn't enough to keep Tate in prison. Meanwhile, Pete narrows down his suspect to one: Caesar. Caesar lives about a mile from the boneyard, has been working as a cable installer for the past 20 years, and has been arrested for assaulting a woman. Ortega also recognizes Caesar as the one who escaped in a car, but still has second thoughts about him being their actual suspect. Womack informs them that agents have been stationed in front of Caesar's house, watching and waiting for him to make a move. They have also summoned one of the women Caesar assaulted, named Nella, to provide a statement that day. Womack takes Nella's statement, and Nella recalls the night Caesar picked her up. She remembers him as tense and distracted, mumbling about God's grace before he began to choke her. Fortunately, a man intervened who turned out to be Tate. Meanwhile, Young informs Carter that Selena is Ortega's niece, which prohibits a family member from conducting an investigation on a particular case, and Carter immediately removes Ortega from the case. That night, Ortega followed Tate, hoping to catch him doing something illegal. When he saw Tate trying to pick up a girl, he believed he had a case, but Tate noticed Ortega following him and drives away. Ortega chased him and eventually crashed his car into Tate's. Tate was bleeding, and Ortega held him at gunpoint. Meanwhile, Caesar choked a woman inside his house and carried her body to his car, planning to dispose of it. Pete and other agents followed him, managed to arrest him. At the same time, Tate explained that he did not kill Selena, and in fact, he dropped her off at their usual place and shows the killer picked her up that night. Tate also confesses that Graham was a corrupt cop who forced witnesses to lie and abused his power. And with this evidence against Graham, Carter orders Ortega to arrest Graham right away. Meanwhile, Womack and Pete reveal that even though Caesar was caught with a dead woman, he is still not the Boneyard killer, with Pete admitting they need to go back where they missed some details. Ortega confronts Pete, but Pete assures him that he wants to catch the killer just as much as he does, because he believes his daughter would not have died that day if he had captured the killer sooner. 1 month later, Ortega receives a shocking discovery of another boneyard with dozens more victims, and Chief Carter wants him back on the case. The film is dedicated to the West Mesa murder victims and states that, up until today, no one has been arrested or charged as responsible. Let us know your thoughts about the movie by leaving a comment below. Feel free to share any details we may have missed. If you enjoyed our recap, please leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more. Thank you for watching.